What is so great about going on a sea kayaking expedition? Well, oftentimes it's the challenges you might face, or new things you might experience, new places you might see, often the beauty of nature and the sea, and, if you're going with others, the company and the enjoyment of being out there, exploring nature and the sea, and being out on the water together, or even if you're solo paddling by yourself. This trip had all of the ingredients for a fantastic weekend. It is actually taking place in the northern Stockholm archipelago in Sweden. And Jan and I, a friend, we are heading out to Håkanskär, which is a remote rocky island, a relatively small island, out in the outermost archipelago, the outermost rim of the archipelago. And actually, it's about as close as you get to the island of Åland between Sweden and Finland. So what we're doing here was actually a particularly exciting paddle for me, because this, back in June 2022, was actually my first sea kayaking expedition. I had done a lot of paddling, I had done some long paddling trips, but it was actually the first time I went out kayak camping, and the first time I went out in the outer archipelago as well. So with me here is my friend Jan, who has kindly provided most of the footage in this video part, and he had more experience and took it upon himself to navigate us, or do the most of the navigation heading out to Håkanskär. And the thing is, we already had a group of friends out there. They had already been paddling for another day, whereas we only had time for 2 days actually, so this is a short expedition. It was 3 days for them. But they are out there in the archipelago, and we are heading out from Räfsnäs. So, in this video, I thought I would comment a bit on kayak expeditioning. The next video part, because I've determined that this needs to be actually 3 parts. I've kind of left this footage for a long time, because there's simply so much video footage from this trip that it's a bit tricky to put it all together. I finally decided to make it into 3 videos. The first one here shows our way there and us meeting our friends in the beautiful Swedish archipelago. You can see the typical red little cottages there. This is typically what the archipelago looks like in Sweden. And the second part will take us to the island of Håkanskär actually, and focus on the midsummer celebrations that we had there. We actually celebrated midsummer on the island itself, with delicious food and good company and a fantastic view out over the sea. So those are the first parts, and the third part actually will be the way back, where we had much calmer weather. It's cold now, as you can see, but it will get windy later, and it was windy here and there. So it was a bit choppy on the way there for some segments. On the way back, though, we had fantastic weather and almost flat water. So that was a fantastic summer day as well. So that will be the third part. But in this video, I thought I would use the footage here, kindly provided again by Jan, who you can follow on YouTube as well. Channel is called Virtual Nordic Nature Motion TV, and I'll link to that in the description of this video. His videos include a lot of what you can see here. The perspective of the front of the kayak and exploring the waterways, often around the Stockholm archipelago especially. And the fact of the matter is quite simply that my own camera on this day was fairly affected by the really hot and humid weather. So my camera footage had a lot of moisture from the heat on the lens, and as such it's not always usable. But Jan recorded most of the trip, minute to minute, and I've tried to abbreviate that into a shorter video like this. And I'll talk a little bit about sea kayaking in this video, and sea kayaking expeditioning, sea kayak camping, etc. And the fun thing is you always come across some new fun things to do. Like in this case, the map had a potential passage here between islands, but ultimately, as you see, it's overgrown, and well, not much else to do than to get through. And ultimately we realized that paddling wasn't really the best method. When it got thicker, we simply had to use our hands and physically drag ourselves through the reeds here. And when you do that, it's kind of taking a chance as to whether you will actually get through the whole way. There are two of us here, so we could assist each other if necessary. Of course, in Sweden we don't really have dangerous wildlife that might be a risk here. The occasional snake and spider perhaps, but if you're somewhere where there are alligators or really dangerous snakes or something of the like, this wouldn't be a good idea. Over here though, it worked, as you can see, and now we are on our way. So as you can see, it is a beautiful day in the archipelago, and for me, personally, this was actually a fantastic day, a fantastic weekend. I mean, it was for all of us, but for me, it was particularly interesting because, as I mentioned before, it was my first trip to the outer archipelago and my first kayak camping trip, actually. It was also the first time that I really took out this kayak, the Itiwit X500 Strenfit, on more choppy seawater, if you will. And I was actually a little bit nervous about this because I hadn't tried this kayak in really choppy conditions. I had paddled significant stretches with it already, and I knew its capacity, but I hadn't really tried it in fully choppy conditions. I was confident enough about the balance as it seemed, but I hadn't really tried it out. So this was the weekend where I really got to know the kayak and know that I could really rely on it, because actually it is quite stable. And before you go thinking that that's a crazy thing to do if you don't have the experience, well, I had been out in really choppy conditions on seawater and in other waters with a similar kayak, my Air Fusion Evo kayak from Advanced Elements. So I knew that I could handle some choppy waters up to a certain degree, certainly up to what we would be expecting with the weather forecast for these days. But again, it was a test with this kayak, and this was the moment where I really got to know what it was capable of, and that opened up the door to a lot of other adventures. And that is the same with any kayak you have. It's really wise, obviously, to go out in conditions where you're confident in your ability or the help that you can receive from those around you. In this case, my experienced friend Jan. And for that matter, you need to have practiced self-rescue, as I had, and also you should practice peer rescue, so basically being assisted while getting into your kayak. But anyway, we're heading out into the archipelago, and as you can see, the further out we get, the more you see of the rockier areas. This is the case in the Stockholm archipelago. There are a few spots where you can actually get out to the more barren, rocky islands relatively quickly, but usually it takes you a longer time might take you half a day or a full day in some cases to get out to the really rocky islands. And some people enjoy more of the greenery, and some people enjoy more of the barren, rocky island architecture out in the archipelago, so to speak. And of course you plan your trip based on it. But the advantage here is that you have a lot of both while heading out, and there is the rocky kind of beauty of the islands out there. So we are heading out to again meet our group of friends who are already paddling. And one learning point here is of course about the communication. So when you're out in areas like this, it's not a guarantee in any way that you can actually connect via phone. We had sort of decided on our plans, and we knew of course that we were heading to Håkanskär, the island, to camp, and they had already set up camp there. So ultimately we would obviously meet them, but obviously they're also kayaking during the day. So if we were going to meet them during the day itself, we had to get in touch. And I had a bit of work there with sending text messages and trying to call. The calls didn't always go through, but the text messages might go through with a lot of delay. So eventually we figured out that we would meet at Vattungarna, which is another really cool island spot near our destination. Of course we should have planned this better before, but it's also a matter of that they were adapting to the weather conditions, so their plan was changing during their actual paddle as they got there. Notice the international cruise ferry on the horizon there. So yeah, this paddle wasn't really crazy in any way in terms of chop or waves, but it was fairly windy during part of the day, and some of the open passages required a bit of focus at least. There were side waves coming in here and there, and quite a bit of chop to deal with. At this point, a couple of years later, I wouldn't really call this or any of this much more than a lot of fun, quite simply. But it's still a bit of focus required, and we did have some windy conditions, even if it doesn't really show on camera, I would say, in all of the footage that I've seen. But that was part of the fun, and as you can see, we are in t-shirts here. It's a really warm day, and by now, end of June, the water had warmed up enough that we deemed it safe enough to go paddling without our dry suits. In fact, it was really warm in the air, so that was a relief that the water temperatures were okay enough to be paddling like this. Otherwise, this would have been tricky. Anyway, you can see the landscape, as we said, changing a bit to more barren, rocky islands now. We're getting a bit further out. And for me, again, this was a fantastic experience in and of itself. Jan and I had paddled a bit before, and we've paddled since then. If you follow this channel, you might have seen us paddle together, for example, to the outer or the southern edge, the absolute southernmost edge of the Stockholm archipelago. We paddled to Landsort last year, the island of Landsort, which is quite famous. There's a lighthouse there, bunkers, and, well, a lot of interesting features, but it's also a location that can get really choppy unless it's a good day with reasonable weather, which we have. Same thing applies here. This is, at the end of the day, the outer archipelago, and it should be respected as such. If the wind picks up and the weather worsens, these areas can be quite challenging, and one should take that into account as a sea kayaker in any setting. Things could be a lot worse than what you planned for, and then you have to have your backup plan, and you have to be able to retreat or go up on shore, and you have to plan accordingly, so you have backup options. The advantage here is that except for the initial passage where we had to cross from the mainland to the next island from Räfsnäs and out eastwards, basically you have to look out for boat traffic there, which can be a bit heavy, and you have to watch out if the wind is not favorable. We had a bit of wind, but nothing that was difficult in any sense. But once you go out towards this particular location we're heading towards, Håkanskär, there are some shorter open passages further out, but for the most part you can connect between the islands. So if something were to get tricky, you can choose to shorten or change your route. And that is something, of course, that any sensible sea kayaker does all the time. You check the weather forecasts and you adjust your paddle based on what you see, what you hear and learn from the weather forecasts, or sometimes you might be able to pick this up on a VHF marine radio from official reports. So even a relatively limited open passage like this could get really choppy out here. So that is something to take into account. But we had some somewhat choppy conditions, some wind, but mostly really advantageous conditions for this paddle. And again, it's warm, it's fantastic. I mean, you see the clear blue sky, and being out here is already quite a great thing to be doing. Of course, for me this was also my first kayak camping trip, as I mentioned, and my first sea kayak expedition, if you can call a 2-day trip an expedition. For the other guys, 3 days. Well, I mean, some might say that an expedition is a week or a month or whatever, but let's call it expeditioning for argument's sake. While a reasonably short camping trip in this case, it still requires you to bring all of the gear. You need your food, your water, and obviously the longer the trip, the more water you need. And when you're out at sea like this, it's tricky to have water purifying solutions. You basically need to have water along, and that takes a lot of space. You need, of course, your tent and your sleeping bag and your change of clothes and all of the gear, including cooking gear for your food. And basically, it adds up to a lot of gear. A sea kayak, obviously, hardshell sea kayak is made for this. Some are better than others in terms of packing space, but it's usually fairly straightforward to pack unless you have a ton of gear. I'll get back to that in a moment.
Är det fint folk som är ute och paddlar? Härligt.
Here we actually meet our friends. Some of whom had not actually paddled together before.
Halloj!
There was Marie we just passed.
Vilka fina människor
Anneli,
som är ute och paddlar mitt i ingenstans.
and Niklas.
Ja. Ja, det här var riktigt skoj.
Yeah, Anneli actually put this trip together as kind of an impromptu activity for midsummer, and those of us who joined because of that, so we're very much appreciative. Jan and I obviously had paddled together before and knew each other, and it was a pleasure to meet the other paddlers as well. And here we are at Vattungarna, which I mentioned, which is another island system just close to our end destination, which is Håkanskär. And the little labyrinth there is actually quite a nice location to check out as well. So now we're paddling over to Håkanskär, where they've already set up camp. And well, what I was going to mention earlier was that Jan's kayak actually works nicely for packing gear even for an expedition. It's a Pakboat Quest 155, whereas my inflatable kayak, this one is folding, mine is inflatable. This one is a lot trickier because it's shorter than any sea kayak, really. And that's why I have the deck bag on deck there. And it works. It doesn't really affect the stability, and it works well even in strong wind. So with a bit of Tetris and a lot of effective packing, kayak camping works with that as well. So anyway, we have now reached our destination of Håkanskär, and if you haven't paddled here and if you're a Stockholm paddler, it's highly recommended. This video has already gone on for some time, so what I'll do, as I mentioned earlier, is that I'll continue with 2 more parts, the next one including our stay here celebrating midsummer. See you there. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe in order to stay updated on new videos and help others find information on this channel. Happy paddles!